Right, good evening and welcome to the talk by Andreas Bieler. My name is Ross Bradshaw from Five Leaves Bookshop. Appropriately, where I'm living, we've just had a thunderstorm, and had this been in another part of the house, you wouldn't have been able to hear a thing because of the torrential rain. Fighting for water, resisting privatisation in Europe. I should say at first that this event is live on the evening of publication, but it will also be recorded for YouTube, and it will appear on the Five Leaves YouTube channel in a few days. So if you're unfamiliar with Five Leaves, we're a radical bookshop in Nottingham. Andreas is a very regular customer of ours. We do about 100 events a year normally, usually pre-COVID, live in the bookshop and at University of Nottingham places sometimes. And currently, of course, we're still organising about 100 events a year, and they're all online. Andreas Bieler is he's a professor of political economy at the University of Nottingham and fellow of the Centre for the Study of Social and Global Justice, whose organisation we have been pleased to work with in the past and on this occasion too. He's an active member of the University and College Union, and we've been pleased to work with him and UCU on the successful campaign for the University of Nottingham to pay their staff the living wage rather than the minimum wage. Andreas is going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and it'll be followed by questions, some from me, hopefully from you. If you put questions in the Q&A part of the screen below you, you can comment on the right, and we'll put up some notices there as well. And some people are posting there greetings from Florida, greetings from Beeston, hello from Cork, one or two other places around the world. There's also a link to the book, Andreas's book. I'll wave it, get that on screen. Fighting for Water, Resisting Privatisation in Europe. We're doing it at a discount price. It's an academic price, and we've managed to sell it for a less academic price than it is normally. There's a link if you want to order it from us. I should say, although it's an academic book, it's a very accessible book, and Andreas seems to be able to manage to, unlike some other academics, to write as if he's a human being, and it's a very readable book on a complex subject, but he manages to get his ideas across. Without drinkable water, at the same time, capital uses water to expand profit-making into ever new avenues. Andreas, tell us more about this, please.
Yes, many thanks, Ross, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to start by sharing my screen for the PowerPoint presentation. Okay. And share. Beginning. All right, so I trust you all have access to my PowerPoint presentation and you can see that. And I would like to start by thanking the Five Leaves Bookshop for hosting tonight's book launch of Fighting for Water, Resisting Privatisation in Europe. As Ross has already mentioned, we have worked together on a number of occasions from the Centre of the Study of Social and Global Justice at Nottingham University. And it's very good to continue with this kind of fruitful interaction. Now, as Ross told you already, I'm going to speak about 20 to 22 minutes perhaps, and just outlining some of the key findings of that research project presented in the book. I'm going to structure my presentation in three parts. First, I'm going to talk about why privatizing water. I will then look at the resistance movements against water privatization before concluding with some reflection on what constitutes a win in these struggles against water privatization. Okay. Why water privatization? Yeah, on the right-hand side, you see the names of some of the key private operators in the water sector, and especially here, of course, Suez and Veolia. So why water privatization? Now, the supporters of privatization, they would point out that there are 4 positive effects as a result of privatization, mainly due to the benefits, as they see it, of free market competition. So as a result of privatization, so the argument goes, first of all, you would have a more efficient water service. The quality of the service would be higher. Importantly, there would be a reduction in costs for consumers. And equally, the way of how water services are managed would be more sustainable. I mean, who could argue with that? Yeah, we all want efficient, high quality, low cost services which are organized in a sustainable way. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, that's almost magic, isn't it? Absolutely. However, there are researchers from the Public Service International Research Unit at Greenwich University in London, and equally, there are also activists and researchers from the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam, and they have showed very clearly in detailed research that the effects of water privatization are anything but the kind of assumed positive results as outlined here on the screen. In effect, the moment water has been privatized, there's a lack of investment in infrastructure, the quality of the water services deteriorates, and one thing which does go up is the costs for consumers. Yeah, water privatization came to municipalities in central Italy around the late 1990s, early 2000s. And the very first thing they were confronted with was an increase in their water bills of sometimes 100% and more. Yeah, so there is no reduction in costs for consumers. Private water is highly expensive. And as these researchers have also made clear, the one thing in which private corporations have been successful is in the maximization of profits. That is what ultimately underpins private water. And that's why it's so important to resist water privatization. However, this book is not about the power of capital and the way of how it manages to maximize its profits. This book focuses on the resistance movements and their successful struggles against water privatization. And in the book, I'm covering the campaign around the Italian water referendum, which took place just over 10 years ago in June 2011, in which a large majority of Italians rejected water privatization. I focus on the European Citizens Initiative on Water and Sanitation as a Human Right in 2012, 2013. I'm looking at the struggles in Thessaloniki, Greece, as well as Athens, Greece, against the privatization of their municipal waterworks. And I'm also engaging with the struggles in Ireland against the imposition of water charges. And really the key question in the book, what animates me, is to find out why is it that these struggles against water privatization have been comparatively successful, while struggles against capitalist exploitation in other areas have often not been met by success. Why is it that water seems to be an area where you can successfully resist capitalism? And I would argue in the book that there are 3 key reasons which are underpinning the success of these water struggles. Now, the first reason is the unique quality of water. In many religions around the world, water is treated as an essential source of life. And it is no surprise that, for example, in the Italian water referendum, key sections of the Catholic Church have been heavily involved in the campaign around the referendum. And on the photo, we see a priest who reads Mass with having the flag of the water movement draped over their altar during the Mass. So very clear, there is a unique quality of water. And importantly, it's not just people on the left or on the center left which have been opposed to water privatization. But equally, actually, people on the center right would often argue, well, when it comes to water, because it's so essential for our survival, water is not the area in which companies should be allowed to make a profit. So very clearly, the success of struggles against water privatization is also due to this very particular unique quality of water. The second main reason of why these struggles have been successful, I would argue, is the long history of water struggles across different geographical levels. And at the bottom on the right-hand corner, you can see a mural celebrating the successful struggle against water privatization in the Bolivian city of Cochabamba in 2000. And of course, for the citizens of Cochabamba, that was a very local struggle. But that struggle had a much broader international resonance. Yeah, it became a kind of an icon for struggles against water privatization elsewhere. And that did have important implications for the struggles in Italy. So it was in 2003 at the first Alternative World Water Summit in Firenze in Italy that suddenly you had these activists from local municipal water committees resisting the increase in prices in their particular cities, coming into contact with activists from Latin America. And they realized, but hold on a second, these people in the global south, these people in Latin America are facing the exactly same pressures, the exactly same companies with whom we are struggling here in Italy, in the global north. And these activists, these Italian activists, became aware of the importance of broadening their campaign and shifting the campaign to a different level. And it was on the basis of this experience, of this engagement with water activists from other parts of the world, that they then decided in 2006 to establish the Italian Forum of Water Movements at the Italian national level. And it was the forum which then underpinned the organization of the successful referendum campaign against water privatization in 2011. Now, following on from the successful referendum in Italy, that was the final cue for the European Federation of Public Service Unions at the European level, a higher level now, to go ahead with its European Citizens Initiative, because it realized and said, oh, hold on a second, yes, Italy has shown us that mobilizing and organizing around water is an area where we can generate interest across wider society. And in 2012 and 2013, this campaign, the European Citizens Initiative on Water and Sanitation, Our Human Right, managed to collect almost 1.9 million signatures across the European Union. Now, as a result of that success, the outcome of the Citizens Initiative and its demands had to be discussed by the European Commission as well as the European Parliament. And it was during the hearing of the European Parliament, which was followed by activists from the Greek city in Thessaloniki, that these water activists in Greece decided, yes, we too won the referendum. Yeah, they were very impressed by the way of how water activists at the European level held to account European parliamentarians and said, yeah, referendum, that is one good possible way forward of trying to fight against water privatization. So on the basis of that experience of the European Citizens Initiative, then water activists in Thessaloniki organized their own referendum in May 2014. And here too, a vast majority of participating voters, over 98%, rejected water privatization of their municipal waterworks. So again, we can see of how there's a constant shift of scale. Yeah? International experiences such as Cochabamba coming together with local experiences, Italy leading to an Italian level, national level development, which is then moved up to the European level, from where it then goes back down to activities of resistance at the local level in Greece. Now, finally, and you can see the photo on the top right-hand corner in relation to the Stop the Water Charges campaign in Ireland. In Ireland, water wasn't a really salient issue during 2012 and 13, and Ireland didn't play a huge role in the European Citizens Initiative. However, when in 2014, in January, the Irish government wanted to impose water charges on its citizens as part of the bailout agreement with the European Union, people started to organize in opposition. And they had a three-pronged campaign between 2014 and 16, consisting of the one hand on the kind of physical blocking of the installation of water meters, combined with large demonstrations at the national level in Dublin, but also across the country, and combined with a widespread campaign of non-payment of these water charges. And ultimately in 2016, this left the Irish government with no alternative but to abandon the introduction of water charges. So another very successful campaign. And again, it indicates, we constantly have this interaction between different campaigns from different geographical level, with a direct exchange of water activists talking about each other's experiences, which underpins this kind of success across Europe as well as beyond Europe. Now, the third key reason for success, I argue in the book, are the broad alliances on which the campaigns were based. So first of all, there were trade unions, were key members of these alliances. And on the right-hand top corner, you can see the logo of the European Federation of Public Service Unions. It was really EPSU which coordinated the various national campaigns with the European campaign during the European Citizens Initiative. And it's interesting to see that not only at the European level, but also in the various national and local contexts, you come across trade unions who, of course, would start their campaign against privatization by focusing on defending the working conditions and wages of their members. That's a normal trade union reaction. However, throughout the struggle, as a result of their interaction with other social movements, many trade union activists actually broadened their horizons and realized that we cannot just focus on the workplace, but that we equally also have to engage with exploitation in the sphere of social reproduction. They realized that their members were not just workers, but their members, of course, also had families and friends outside the workplace, and they equally were relying on access to drinkable water. And so these trade unions realized, hold on a second, if we want to participate in that campaign, we need to be able to look at the workplace, but also go beyond and combine those two spheres. And I thought most interesting, perhaps during my field research, was an interview with a trade unionist from the trade union of the Athens Public Water Company. And he explained to me that their trade union at their congress had decided that they would support workers who refused to disconnect the water connection of households. So the normal procedure would be somebody, because of the poverty, because of austerity, can no longer pay for these water services. So the company would ask their workers to disconnect these people from access to water. And because of this backing of the trade union also in the wider area of Athens, workers refused to carry out these orders. They refused to disconnect people from their access of water. And I think that's a key, interesting example of how trade unions were able to go beyond a very narrow focus and broaden their approach to encompass the needs of wider society. In addition to trade unions, we had developmental NGOs, which were part of the various alliances. And if you look at the European Citizens Initiative, one of the key goals was to ensure that the European Union in its external dealings would work towards the human right of water elsewhere in the world. So there was clearly this developmental focus. We had environmental NGOs being key allies in the struggles, especially at the European level in Italy, as well as in Thessaloniki. And many environmental activists, they realized that the moment the profit motive comes to dominate the management of water, then the environment is amongst its first victims. So environmental groups are very important. You can see on the right-hand side the logo of the Lega Ambiente in Italy. But equally key was the cooperation with social movements, local citizens' committees. Yeah, any resistance to exploitation also always needs to have a particular locale where it actually engages in the struggle. And this was provided by these local citizens' committees. And at the bottom on the right-hand side, you see the logo of the Comitato Acqua Pubblica Torino, which is just one example of the multiple local committee groups, which organized at the local level in order to make sure that enough voters turned out during the referendum campaign in June 2011. So really, this broad alliance of trade unions, developmental NGOs, environmental NGOs, social movements, was a key aspect of why these struggles against water privatization were so successful. But when we look at the issue of these water struggles, on these struggles against water privatization in Europe, it's not just the ability of these struggles to be successful in their resistance, which is so impressive, but it's actually also the transformative potential they have managed to generate as part of their struggles. And this has developed especially around this notion of water as a commons. So in Italy, activists, when they started to mobilize for the referendum, they became aware of the fact that if they just said, well, water needs to stay in public hands, that would not be good enough to convince many citizens to support their campaign. Too often Italian citizens had been confronted by rather ineffective, highly bureaucratic public services. So they thought about how they could think of an alternative which would be also appealing to these people. And it's water as a commons which provided here the way forward. As a commons, as something which is jointly owned, something which is jointly enjoyed, and something which is also jointly preserved for future generations. So in a way, you offer water as a commons as a very different way of organizing the economy, different from the private economy, but equally also different from the public technocratic management of services. And so it was the combination of an emphasis on the commons combined with new forms of democracy. Because if you want to ensure that something is jointly managed, of course, you also need to provide the possibilities of people to directly participate in the management of how a particular service is organized. So it was this combination of the commons with forms of direct democracy which provided then this kind of transformative potential resulting from these struggles. And I would argue actually provided a glimpse into a future beyond capitalism, a potential future beyond capitalism. The question then, which many activists concerned themselves was, well, if we see water as a commons, and if we have water as such a successful area of resistance against capitalist exploitation, what about the potential expansion to other sectors? Should we not also look at local public transport as a commons, health services, education? And so we can see how potentially, at least, we can move out from water into other areas and work towards this alternative post-capitalist future. But of course, we also need to see what actually signifies a win within these struggles. And I had recently an email exchange with a water activist from the European water movement. And he said to me, Andreas, how can you call the Italian water referendum a success? Look at what has happened over the last 10 years. There's only one privatized company which was re-municipalized, Acqua Bene Comune Napoli. You can see the logo here of the company. But all the other companies which had been privatized before the referendum are still part privatized. Look at the ongoing pressure on further privatization of Italian water, which are ongoing at the moment. So how can you say the Italian water referendum was a success? Well, my response there would be, okay, first of all, we need to remember that the successful referendum abrogated a law which would have forced all Italian municipalities to part privatize their water companies. And that has been avoided. If there are still many water companies in public hands in Italy, then it is also thanks to the referendum. But of course, the person from the European water movement, he's right. Yeah, capital always comes back for another attempt at privatization. There is no final victory, and we have seen that in the Italian context, but we also see that within a wider context at this point in time. And there are two very worrying developments at the moment. Yeah, so in the United States, they have started to quote water futures on the stock exchange. So the financialization of water is being driven to new extremes. And we also see discussions by technology companies around smart water. Here, the idea of introducing ever more complex technology in order to ensure the most sustainable, the most efficient, as they would argue, usage of water resources. And ultimately, again, this is only about maximizing private profits. But of course, these companies are not so stupid that they would put forward the idea of we engage in water to maximize profits. They wouldn't say that. They have actually started in a very constructive way to engage with these discourses about water as a human right. And when you look at the websites of Veolia and Suez, they would also say, we can play a very important role in ensuring the water, the human right, the access to water as a human right. We can play a key role in the process. Yeah, they would outline on their websites how they are essential partners in making sure that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in relation to water are met. And that's, of course, a quite dangerous development. Yeah? And this is where ongoing struggles also have to engage with. So very clearly, I think we shouldn't underestimate the success of the campaigns, which I've investigated in the book. But we also need to remember that capital always comes back. There is no final victory. And that can only lead to the conclusion, yeah, that the struggle continues. La lotta continua. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. I think that, having read the book over the last couple of days, I think that's a fair summary of it. I have one technical problem in that I can't see the Q&As. Could you now put them in the chat room, please? And if there are any already there, could Simon, our technical whiz kid in the background, move them across there? I can see the chat, but I can't see the Q&A. I should say that some people have an alternative ending of their evening, which starts about 8 o'clock, and we will finish in time for that. If people are wondering what that is, you perhaps haven't been on Planet Britain over the last few days, and possibly not on Planet Denmark for all I know either. Andreas, you mentioned about the companies. You mentioned Suez, which seems an appropriate term for a water company, and Veolia. And you hinted, or you didn't hint, you remarked in passing about their involvement overseas. How big are they? Are they absolutely global? Do they cover the global south too?
Yes, so both corporations are really global transnational corporations. Also, Suez, for example, is active in Mexico also, and they have other subsidiaries in the global south. What is quite interesting is that they cooperate with local water corporations. Yeah, so it's not just, oh, here's Suez in Mexico, but they have joint operations, especially in Catalonia, for example. You have Akbar Suez, which operates there. So they are involved across the world in all kinds of different formations. I think it's important to remember that at some stage, investment in water in the global south, in developing countries became very unproductive because there was too much resistance, and these water corporations realized that actually we need to invest much more in infrastructure than what we would get out as a profit. So to some extent, they have withdrawn from developing countries, and they focus now more on developed countries. So the water companies in Greece are still attractive to these large corporations. or they look at providing kind of a service expertise in managing water management. So they have diversified their strategies in this respect. But as such, both are global corporations heavily involved in water, but equally waste management, so other utilities.
Mm. We certainly see Veolia absolutely everywhere. Yes, unfortunately. What about the UK? I mean, Severn Trent happily sits there taking lots of money from us all the time. What happened here? What happened in this country? Where was the resistance to it? Is there anything ongoing about renationalising or readjusting water in this country?
Yeah, so interestingly, water privatization in the UK was one of the UK was one of the countries where that happened first in Europe, and it was in 1989. Towards the end of the Thatcher reign, that water was privatized in England and Wales. And in contrast to the cases I've discussed in the presentation as well as the book, there is no widespread movement against water privatization. There's not a large movement in favor of water renationalisation. Yeah, there are so many different struggles, I would argue, people have to engage with: protecting the NHS, protecting other parts of public services, the postal service, that perhaps activists are also overstretched to some extent. But importantly, there is what I would call the campaign group We Own It, which looks at renationalisation of key industries more broadly. And they also have a clear focus on water. And they point out that the majority of British people are very much in favour of renationalising water. Yeah, and water prices have increased in real terms since privatisation between 40 and 50% of the UK, and very much this goes towards covering the profits of these private corporations, which have been bought, sold on, yet again sold on, and are traded on the stock exchange. So it's a huge profit bonanza, private water in the UK. And at least as far as We Own It are concerned, there is continuing pressure on renationalisation.
You said England and Wales. What about Scotland and the north of Ireland?
So Scotland is still separate. Yeah, they have water in national hands. And I think the picture is similar in Northern Ireland, although I cannot confirm that fully. Yeah.
It's Scotland's water, as I'm sure the SNP would rightly say. In the two countries that you compare and contrast, the campaigns in Italy and Ireland. In Italy, an involvement of a lot of non-political organisations, in shorthand, and in Ireland, a greater involvement of political organisations from the left and left nationalists. Coming to this country and extrapolating from these campaigns, not talking about water here, but about campaigns that are currently ongoing. You talked about the NHS, you talked about the Postal Service a second ago. Do you see any models there that we can take forward about how we should be campaigning for our public services? Should we be looking at involving, I don't know about the Catholic Church, but trying to persuade the unions to be more coming out of the workplace and out of the factory floor in ways that only Unite Community, which I'm a member of, seems to be able to do, or working with organisations like Nottingham Citizens, which is managing to bring in a lot of faith communities in campaigning, for example, for the living wage. What's the model of campaigning that you see as an activist, as an international activist who's studied Europe, the global south? What should we be doing here? Give us the answers.
Not sure I have all the answers to that, but I think what is interesting is, of course, and that comes through the inspiration of the activists across border. There are many commonalities of the struggles and the challenges faced, but then there are also local specificities when it comes to the form of resistance. Yeah, so you can't just transplant one strategy from a country to another. And it's interesting, for example, in Italy, there was a great disillusionment with party politics, because over decade since the early 80s, especially during the 1990s, you had alternating center-left, center-right governments, and they just continued with the same kind of neoliberal, eventually austerity policies. And people in Italy made very clear political parties have to be relegated to a secondary role in the referendum campaign. We have a broad popular movement. We don't want to engage in this narrow political party sphere. Ireland is slightly different. Ireland so far has never had a center-left government, and so from a political point of view, there are still broad sections of society who would hope for a different policy course once you have a center-left government. Sinn Féin came very close in the most recent elections, but eventually is in opposition again at the moment. So in that sense, there would be still a stronger focus on the political sphere in Ireland, rightly so or not. But at the same time, that also led to quite significant tensions within the Irish movement, because we had widespread community groups based at the local level, and they were fed up with representative democracy. They experimented in own forms of direct democracy. They didn't want to engage with party politics. They were even skeptical of trade unions, who had lost a lot of credibility in Ireland in the preceding years, because they had also to some extent collaborated with restructuring and cuts. And so there were tensions. So at some stage in the campaign, the unions and the affiliated left parties, they moved towards ideas about creating a new party to compete for power, whereas the local community groups, they didn't want to be associated with this kind of move. So there were tensions as a result of that. Now, what are the lessons for the UK? I think at the national level, personally, I would say there was a big opportunity with the Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. In their election manifestos 2017 and 19, the renationalisation of key services, including water, was part of that, and that would have implemented. We have missed that moment. I think that much is clear now. In that situation, I would argue that precisely what you refer to, Ross, this kind of broad-based alliances across civil society. You mentioned Nottingham Citizens. That's a very good example at the local level in this respect. Bringing together different faith groups, churches, synagogue, mosques, with trade unions, with social movements, with NGOs. They have actually been quite successful in fighting for social justice at the local level. And the Nottingham Citizens campaign around misogyny as a hate crime has even had now an impact at the national level. So there are ways of this kind of broader, not political party aligned kind of initiative struggles for social justice, which could be a way forward in the here and now.
We have about 10-15 minutes left, so do put questions in the chat room should you have them. We certainly have plenty to talk about ourselves, but it'd be good if we weren't the only two voices heard. One of the things that you mentioned, you used the word efficiency, that the water companies said that they offer us efficiency. In your book, it's quite clear that they offer us inefficiency. And we know that from the water companies in this country, that we're paying for a lot of water that is never received by anybody. Why are these companies so inefficient? Do they care?
It's not that they don't care as such, but I think the moment you have profit maximization as your main goal, and as a private corporation within a capitalist system, that's almost inevitably your main dominant driving force underpinning your efforts. Any kind of investment in infrastructure, which is urgently necessary in order to ensure that we don't lose so much drinkable water just going out through leaks in the pipe network, of course, is relegated to a secondary place. So there are some official regulatory kind of demands on these water companies, and they have to comply with them. But loads of the kind of the resources of the finance they receive from individual households, they are being siphoned off into profits rather than reinvested in the water network. And to run water services for large cities is enormously complex, yeah, but complex and enormously difficult and expensive. But if you siphon off the kind of water bill finances you receive into profits, then that money is missing for reinvestment into the infrastructure.
Going back to, there will be one football reference tonight, and that's at a press conference the other day, some famous footballer took Coca-Cola off the table, replaced it with water, and said we should all be drinking aqua. True, but that aqua was also owned by by Coca-Cola, which takes us a bit onto bottled water, and some of the blue community, the organizations have been campaigning against bottled water, and a lot of it, of course, environmentalists have been campaigning against bottled water, and the fizzy drink companies are in there selling us something that comes through the tap. So talk to us a little about the politics of bottled water as well.
So profit making with water comes in different forms and shapes. And in the book, I'm focusing on the privatization of water and sanitation services. But there are equally important areas where also struggles takes place. Yeah, and bottled water is one of those areas where there is resistance. Very often these large corporations buy up, if one can do that cheaply, own kind of water springs, just pump the water out, put them in bottles and sell this water at a high profit. So bottled water is one of the other areas where water is being commodified in order to make large profits. Water usage in the extractive industries, yeah, with horrendous consequences for people who live in the area. If you look at the tar sands industry in Alberta, in northern Canada, apocalyptic scenes of what's left behind once this industry, the tar sands industry, leaves again. And very often it's indigenous people whose water is then being spoiled, who are made undrinkable, who suffer from that. And of course, there are equal moments of resistance. Think about Standing Rock and the uprising by indigenous people against the transport of this oil from the tar sands fields across their territory and in danger of polluting their water resources. And so bottled water is one of these other aspects of how water is used in order to make profit. And the book hasn't dealt in detail with that. The book focuses on the privatization of water and sanitation services. But again, it's a good reference you make there, because we need to look, of course, also further and see how water is being tried to be made into a profitable product by capital in all kinds of different forms.
I realize I'm at risk of I mean, the book is well worth reading. But I'm at risk of asking you lots of questions which are not in the book, and I've done a bit of that so far, and I'm going to ask you another question, which is about water and war. I can remember my friend Colin Ward, my late friend Colin Ward, many years ago, writing a book about water, talking about it, and one of the things he talked about was that many wars in the future, civil and otherwise, could be about water. And the one that obviously comes to mind is over the aquifers in Palestine and Israel, where water is going to be a scarce resource, and in the global south, with development requiring much more water, and also hopefully less poor people wishing to use water more, or being able to use more, or demanding more personal water, rather than walking 7 miles to collect. People deserve the right to have water on tap, but water is scarce. I mean, was Colin right? Is this like one of the major issues for the future over the fight, not for water resisting privatization, but the fight for water between competing interests, population interests?
So water is scarce. To say anything else would be wrong, but it's not scarce because necessarily of natural conditions. Of course, there are droughts and that leads to shortages in a particular area, but researchers who follow this kind of political ecology approach, they point out that actually where we do have shortages, they are often the result of political decision making. Yeah, so you had, for example, I think it was Nestle who could still pump out water for its bottled water and soft drinks industry in California, while people had a house pipe ban imposed on them at the same time during a drought. So water shortage is always the result also of political decisions. And of course, when it comes to these political decisions, then war between countries or between different groups, that is the ultimate violent form of these kind of political struggles. Yeah. And very clearly that is a danger. And we see that in the Middle East, where you have already water being one of the key reasons when it comes to military conflict. Absolutely.
Want to mention about the trade unions, and trade unions globally are one of your major concerns, and that of the academics who work with you, and several of your colleagues have talked about global trade unions in the bookshop. And it's quite noticeable about Unite in Ireland, talking about moving into the community. Do you think British trade unions in their current form, or in their weakened form, are actually able to do much of the community pressure that we would really like?
I would argue that, so it's not automatic that trade unions are able to look at issues beyond the workplace. The first automatic reaction is you defend your members, their wages, and working conditions, you defend their jobs. And it's not automatic that then you would think about wider society. And that was the interesting experience in researching the book, but I came across quite a few trade unions who perhaps started off by defending the jobs of their members, but in the process of the struggle broadened their outlook and then reached out into wider society. And it's not automatic. There's a trade union in Italy which did not defend its workers refusing to cut off water supplies to houses. Yeah, in Italy that did happen. It's not automatic, but you have this kind of progressive stance as you had in Athens with the water workers there. But it's a possibility. It's often in moments of struggles that this broader horizon can be developed. And I would argue that in the UK already you will find individual trade unionists or local sections, or even at the national level, some trade unions. Unite Community is in a way an acknowledgement of that importance, who are able to reach out into wider community concerns. And I would argue that that's an ongoing struggle, also for us as trade unionists inside trade unions, to ensure that our trade union becomes part of these wider struggles rather than the narrow focus.
Yeah, I was very impressed with one remark in the book about, which was, I think, from Unite in Ireland, where some spokesperson said that if we achieve victory over water, we'll achieve a better economic outcome for our members than we might in the next wage negotiations, because it will be a permanent financial improvement. And I think that was how it was sold to the members. You're not just fighting a community campaign, you're fighting for your own pocket as well. And I was really, really impressed with that. And it would be lovely to think that our unions could find similar ways of expressing themselves.
It's one example of a particularly enlightened trade unionist who was an influential member of that anti-water charges campaign in Ireland. Yeah, very good.
I was also thinking of, it was a long time ago, the building workers in Australia who would refuse to build inappropriate things, and occasionally longshoremen in America would refuse to ship weapons of mass destruction out. And indeed, there were unions in Scotland that refused to sell to mend arms for Chile. But maybe these are bigger issues than water. close to running out of time. Are there things that there's a mention of blue communities, which I mentioned, and they're in the book. Do you want to just describe those that come towards the end of the book, what they are?
Yeah, the Blue Communities is an initiative led by the Canadian author and activist Maud Barlow, who has played a key role at the international level, also in the campaign to convince the United Nations to decide that water is a human right, at the international level. And it's a key initiative by Maud Barlow, and I think it's very innovative because it gives people something where they can engage locally in order to move towards public water and to protect public water, while it can also, the more it snowballs from community, from city to city, it can also have a broader impact. And in order to become a blue community, a number of conditions need to be fulfilled by these communities. They need to recognize and protect water and sanitation as human rights. They need to protect water as a public trust by promoting publicly financed, owned and operated water and wastewater services. And they also need to ban or phase out bottled water in public institutions in their community. And there's one blue community in Switzerland, Bern, which added a condition that you need to support public-public cooperation in the global south, not public-private cooperation. And so it's very successful. And actually, I was at a workshop of the European Water Movement in November 2019 in Brussels, early December, actually end November, early December. And it was also held in conjunction with Brussels becoming a blue community, making that commitment in support of public water. And it's a growing movement. It's something people can engage with on the ground and contribute to the wider international development. And in that sense, really a very positive initiative. Yeah.
Good, thank you. It's useful to end on a positive note. I want to thank Andreas for the talk and for doing the work, and I know that there are several of his academic colleagues who've been participating in the book as well, who are acknowledged throughout, of course. Andreas's book is available from the bookshop. If you can't pick up the link from the chat, you'll find it on our website. It's £20, which is a bit cheaper than it normally is. And I want to thank Zed Press for, now owned by Bloomsbury, Zed Press for publishing the book, and who've been promoting this event as well. And I think they've done a very good editorial job with Andreas on producing a book that I think will matter. I think that will matter, and I think it will be discussed quite widely. I think that's it for me. That allows us to leave with those who need to have a short break before their other commitments, and for those of the rest of us, we can just go on to our cheese and biscuits or whatever it is that we're going on to tonight. Thanks very much, Andreas. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you,
Rod. And the technical in the background. Bye, everybody. Thanks for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye. Thanks for your comments.